Imagine you being dragged in front of 100 trained marksmen who all fire and yet they all miss. Now, according to atheism, you shouldn't be surprised or even asking why they missed. Did we pique your interest? If so, come on board.
Welcome back to the next episode of SAFT Podcast, and it's a delight to be back as we continue on our discussion on the fine tuning argument. In the previous episodes, we have broken down the fine tuning argument into different parts, and we have minutely discussed about each and every aspect. So, before going ahead, as we are closing towards the end of this series or the sub series of the fine tuning argument, Jacob, why don't you give us a recap of what we discussed in the previous episode?
Yeah, in the previous episode, we talked about one of the possible explanations that we have to make sense of why the universe is fine tuned for life. Okay. And that explanation that we have to deal with is physical necessity. What that means is that we look at the universe and the universe is finely tuned to make way for life, to be hospitable for life instead of being hostile towards life. So, is it the case that this universe, with its fine tuning for life, is the only way a universe could exist? Like, is it physically necessary? Is it a necessity that this is the only way a universe could exist? And what we saw there is that that is not the case. And we looked into string theory and Stephen Hawking's remark on string theory, how string theory predicts that there could be 10 to the power 500 different ways a universe could exist. So, bottom line is that this is not the only way, or this is not the only universe that could ever exist, which means that physical necessity is out of the window. And then we'll be looking into what is the other way to make sense of the fine tuning argument. So, just to recap, the formulation of the fine tuning argument is that everything that begins to exist, that is not the formulation of the fine tuning argument. Now, if you've been listening along and if
Yeah.
you go like, hey, that's not the formulation of the fine tuning argument, well, pat yourself. Now, take a pause and answer yourself. What was the argument that I was trying to formulate? Okay. If you figure that out, try to formulate the fine tuning argument on your own. Right? So I hope you've given that a shot. Now, Piyush, what is the proper formulation of the fine tuning argument?
Yeah, I mean, well, you almost got the audience over there, but okay, so here's the formulation of the fine tuning argument. Premise one, it states that the fine tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Premise two, it is not due to physical necessity or chance. Therefore, it is due to design. Now, we had covered this a bit, but there is something, which really comes into our minds at times when we talk about the probability of this universe of ours to exist when we only have just one universe, right? I mean, if we talk about for example, there's this person who wins a lottery. The probability of this person winning the lottery is one out of the n number of people who have bought lottery tickets. Correct? So
Yeah.
probability applies over there. It's basically 1 by n. But here we have just one universe. So how do we tackle this question or this thought which comes into our mind while discussing about the argument?
Yeah. This is a great place to start this off. And I've seen this question being asked, if I recall, by some physicists as well. So, a great way to capture how we deal with the probability part is an illustration by John Barrow, who is a famous theoretical physicist. What he says is that take a whiteboard. Now, on that whiteboard, place a single red dot. That red dot represents our universe with the specific numerical attributions of the constants and values that we have in the universe, the gravitational constant, cosmological constant, the entropy of the universe at the initial point, all of that. Okay. So, with all of those figures that our current universe has, that red dot represents it. Now, take the value or the force of gravity, the gravitational constant, and tweak that constant, that figure by a bit. So you have a universe with gravity that could be a bit more powerful. Now, is that universe one in which life could exist? If yes, that's a red dot. If no, it's a blue dot. in that way, you take different constants and different values that we have within this universe, you tweak each one, holding the other constant, and you explore all of the possibilities. Right? This is something that we also do in economics. So in economics, when we talk about different models or theories, we have this principle called ceteris paribus. And I think it's there in other fields of discipline as well. But as I come from an economics background, I can speak to it, where we say, oh, there are n number of buyers and sellers in the market, and government intervention is so and so and so and so. And then we say ceteris paribus, meaning all other things being constant. So we try and tweak different parts of the theory or the model to see how it would play out in the real world. It's a similar approach here. And when you explore all of the possibilities, what you will see is that it looks to be a sea of blue dots with couple of red dots here and there. So it's a sea of universes that could not permit life, with infinitely small improbability of universes that could possibly hold life. And that's the way we can make sense of the probability at play. That's the way we would get a sample size, so to speak, and then the universe to pick out of it to form the probability.
Yeah, this analogy is helpful, but there are some people who say that the existence of the universe is equally improbable, and yet some universe must exist.
Yeah, that is it immediately comes off that way, right? So the way that they would put forward, or the way it is come forward, is that imagine 100 people who are partaking in lottery, or 1 million people who are partaking in lottery, right? What is the probability that any particular individual is going to win the lottery? That's 1 out of 1 million, which is extremely improbable. But yet, someone must win the lottery, right? So what they say is that it's highly improbable that any one person is going to win the lottery. But given the improbability, if a person wins the lottery, he shouldn't say that the lottery is fine-tuned for him. Or because, oh, look at it, it's highly improbable that I would win the lottery and I won the lottery. So the lottery must be rigged in my favor. The lottery must be fine-tuned for me to make it happen. And what they try to say is that, well, it's highly improbable that a universe that's fine-tuned for life would exist, or any form of universe would exist, but some universe must exist. So just like in the lottery, we shouldn't be surprised that, oh, it's a fine-tuned universe. Now, it looks immediately off the bat to be a solid response. But the issue is, going back to the John Barrow analogy of the red dot, blue dot, we're not talking about the improbability of a dot. We're talking about the improbability of a red dot. Now, to take the lottery analogy into another extent is, imagine you mix a white ball into a big pool of billions of black balls. Now, to put it in a mathematical way, Piyush, if there are 10 people in a room and 5 people are Indians and 5 people are Americans, what is the probability of you getting an Indian at random out of that room?
So it's 5 by 10,
5 by 10.
which is basically comes down to 1 by 2. Yeah.
1 by 2, right? Imagine it's 6 Indians and 4 Americans. Now, what's the probability of getting an Indian?
6 by 10.
6 by 10. Okay, let's keep it simple there. We don't need to simplify the fraction. 6 by 10, 4 by 10.
Yeah.
Now, imagine it's 9 Indians and 1 American. The probability of getting an Indian is
9 by 10.
10. The probability of getting an American is 1 by 10. If it's 10 Indians and 1 American, the probability of getting an Indian is 10 by 11, because the total number is 11. And the probability of getting American is 1 by 11. So it's 10 Indians and 1 American. Now let's go into the white ball, black ball analogy. Imagine there's a pool of 1 billion black balls. Okay? So that's a 10 figure. That's why I used the 10 analogy part. There's 1 billion black balls and there's 1 white ball out of it. So the probability of getting any black ball out of that figure is 1 billion out of 1 billion 1. The total number is 1 billion and 1. Right? That's how many black ball plus white ball. So probability of getting a black ball is the number of black balls in it divided by the total number. So the number of Indians in it divided by the total number of men. Similarly, number of black balls divided by the total number of balls, which is 1 billion divided by 1 by 1 divided by 1 billion 1. The probability of getting a white ball now is 1 out of 1 billion 1. So we can say the probability of getting any particular ball is still equally improbable. Like it could be any ball out of the 1 billion 1 ball. But when you look at the black ball versus the white ball part, it is highly probable that you would get a black ball than a white ball. So we are not talking about the individual probability of getting a ball or a dot. We're talking what is the probability that given all the black balls, given all the blue dots which represent the universe that life can't exist, that you would get a white ball out of the billion, that you would get a red dot. That is the key part. That's where the lottery analogy actually makes sense. And which is why the chance, the issue with chance, trying to say that this is all here by chance, because very difficult to hold on. Now, leaving that, there's something else that we need to spend a bit more of attention to. We have covered this before in one of our podcasts, but it needs a bit more of attention. It's called the anthropic principle. And it was in its formulation that I've seen it to be most popular. It was put forward by John Barrow and Frank Tipler. Frank Tipler, I think, is a mathematical physicist, if I recall right. John Barrow is a theoretical physicist. So it's quite popular. In fact, in one episode of The Big Bang Theory, which is not stranger to SAFT podcast, Sheldon Cooper's character talks about the anthropic principle, and Raj Gopal's character speaks in favor of saying, yeah, I think that's true, and Sheldon is also in favor of it. So it's featured on a famous science show as well and being endorsed as well. And what it says is that we shouldn't be surprised to see that this universe has life in it. That's the bottom line. But what is the formal way that the anthropic principle is understood, Piyush?
Yeah, so here's a formal way. If observers who have evolved within a universe observe its constants and quantities, it is highly probable that they will observe them to be fine tuned for their existence. So, this is like, previously we've discussed about the puddle analogy, right? So, a puddle formed in a pothole after a rain observes that the pothole perfectly fits, correct, but it shouldn't be surprised that it fits well because it was adapting itself to fit the pothole perfectly from the starting itself, right?
Yeah, exactly. Now that is true. Like it shouldn't be surprised. The puddle shouldn't be surprised at that. But the proper application of the puddle analogy, as we've covered before, is that why out of all the potholes in the world that have failed to hold the water in, is this one particular pothole able to do so? Why is that? Right? That's sort of the way to look at it. Now, even if we've evolved to fit the puzzle piece of the universe so that we can thrive within the universe, the probability question at play is how is it that there exists a universe that made our evolution possible in the first place? That is the $1,000,000 question. That is the critical question to ask. It's not about whether we've evolved or any of that. It's, let's say we've evolved. Okay, maybe that's why we are observing the universe to be fine-tuned. We're talking about life in its most basic formulation, as we covered in the initial bit. We're not talking about human beings or extensive civilizations' possibility of existence in the universe. We're talking about the very fact that life in its most basic form could exist in this universe, while when all of the odds are stacked against it. Interestingly, for this anthropic principle to hold true, for this anthropic principle as you've covered, to hold true, evolution must be true. So if evolution is shown as false, then it has significant implications when we talk about the origin of the universe as well, for someone who is convinced by the anthropic principle. And in responding to the anthropic principle, philosopher John Leslie gives this example, and it's a great one. Okay. So imagine you're dragged in front of a firing squad of 100 trained marksmen. Okay. And the command is given, and they all fire, and you hear the sound of 100 bullets whizzing past you. Like with your eyes closed, you can sense the bullets going past you. And then you realize that you're not been hit. You're not dead. Like all of the bullets have gone past you, but you're still alive. And you would be extremely surprised that you are alive, right? Piyush? I mean, we would be like, how in the world is that possible? Like, how is it that I'm still alive? But John Leslie says that despite that, we won't say, oh, I really shouldn't be surprised at the improbability of them missing, because if they hadn't missed, then I wouldn't be here to be surprised about it. I am here, so therefore there's nothing to be explained. Then we will go, what is Leslie on about? I didn't understand any of that. When I first read Leslie's point, I was like, I don't get what he's going after. So stick with me. The anthropy principle is trying to say that you are observing the universe to be fine-tuned for you. Don't be surprised because you're here to observe it. That's why you're observing it to be fine-tuned for you. So there's nothing to ask further as to why is it fine-tuned for you. You are here to observe it that way. Therefore, you're observing it.
Yeah.
Therefore, nothing to be explained. That is the anthropy principle's point that it's trying to get at. Now, in John Leslie's example, John Leslie is saying that if you apply the same thought, what we would in effect be saying when the firemen all missed the shot and you're alive is that, oh, I shouldn't be surprised that they've all missed. Because if they didn't miss, I wouldn't be here to observe it. And the only reason I'm surprised, the only reason I'm able to observe that they missed is because I'm here, because they missed. So that is why I'm observing that they've missed. And we'll go like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, how can you come out of that and say that is your best explanation for making sense of it? That is precisely the issue with the anthropic principle as well. So the equivalency there is that the anthropic principle is talking about us observing the universe fine-tuned for us. In John Leslie's example, the equivalence is that me observing them all missing the shot. Right? So we're trying to make sense of why did they miss? Why is the universe fine-tuned for us? And so he's showing a parallel with the anthropic principle's reasoning and showing, in effect, that the same way we would question the John Leslie example and go, that doesn't make any sense. Like, that's a really stupid question to ask. Yeah, you're there to observe it. Because if you were dead, you wouldn't be observing it. But still the question is, why did they miss? That's exactly the point that we have to ask the anthropic principle as well. Why is the universe fine-tuned in the first place? Whether you evolved, whether that happened, this happened, that's all secondary. Why is this universe having these values and these constants in the first place? It could have had any other way. It could have been in 10 to the power 500 different ways the universe could have been. But it is this universe with these values, with these constants, with these quantities and all of that. Why is it so? And it is highly improbable. And that there, I think, is a very strong rebuttal of the anthropic principle at play here. Because when we look at all of the enormous probability of the universe being the way it is, of the firing men missing it, and we still see that this is the universe that we have, a life permitting one out of all of the life prohibiting one, of reality in which I exist, out of all the realities in which at least one marksman could have hit me and killed me, why did they all miss? Why is this the universe that we are in which is life permitting? So we would be rational in saying, I think there is more than chance at play as to why I am alive, be it the marksman or the universe.
Yeah, right. I think that was very clear. I mean, but there are still people. I mean, now if someone comes and says that, okay, the result due to which all of these marksmen missed was due to sheer chance. I mean, what can we say about it, right? So yeah, I think with that we have covered quite a bit, and it's I hope it was pretty clear for the audience to understand why the fine-tuning of the universe is not due to sheer chance. And yeah, with that we come to the end of this episode. It was really great to discuss about it, and thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in the next one.